Good morning. My name's Jonathan Norman from the Major Projects Association, and I'm delighted to be interviewing Richard Corderoy from the Oakland Group on the subject of data analytics. Richard, let's start with a quick introduction. So if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, I'm Richard Corderoy. I'm the managing director of the Oakland Group. My background is I grew up in the dockyards of Scotland after university, so I cut my teeth in the world of submarine refits and big ship refits, and from there moved into a mixture of consulting, data and systems and the like. And eventually, about 10 years ago, came back to the world of capital programs. And since then, I've done a lot in the world of program governance, 3 lines of defense models, and kind of how do you run portfolios of programs, but also really lucky to run the Oakland team. And we have a fantastic people with some super bright tech people in it who broadly are answering the challenge of, we've got all of this data in programs. We all give ourselves a bit of a hard time, perhaps not being as data centric as we should be. Well, what's the art of the possible and what can we do? And I suppose that's led us here today.
Yeah, indeed. I wanted to pick up on something that you mentioned in one of your recent blog posts. So you talked about this idea of closing the imagination gap with data. And I felt that's a good place to start. Do you want to explain what did you mean by that?
Yeah, and I suppose I hold some SpaceX and some of these Uber brands responsible for this, because we've all got this idea of the moonshot in our parlance now. And obviously, project data means we're going to have AI bots running projects and telling us when to do things or not to do things and all that sort of stuff. And it's great, and we can all kind of imagine that because it's really abstract. The bit that's harder, I think, is when you say to someone, well, your world today is Power BI, a bit of Excel, some system reports, all this sort of real world stuff we deal with. What do you want to do first? What do you want to do in 2 to 3 months' time? What's the art of something that's achievable? And actually, that's a much harder question to answer because it has to be quite tangible. It's like asking someone who's only ever lived, I don't know, in a garden shed to design a big house. Well, you sort of get it, 4 walls and a roof, but really, what's all the detail that's required? And so all of this imagination gap is about bringing people back down to earth and saying, actually, well, what are those bits of forecasting you really struggle with today? What's that report that takes age to build every month because it's all knife and fork? What's those questions that you dread being asked by the management team because actually that question means you've got to go out and talk to 40 project managers and get them to submit individual returns again. And so let's start there. And I tend to find that's a much more fruitful, if slightly less click-worthy response than the automated project that doesn't need humans. I think we're a long way from that.
Yeah, that's interesting because it strikes me that data and analytics are very much belong in the world of what might be seen as agile project management. So starting small and experimenting and kind of building from ground zero. And that's not necessarily a capability or a perspective that somebody who's running a major project is used to.
I think it is, and we're not advocating that you build a railway or a motorway in an agile way. I think that would end pretty badly. But I think there is a whether you want to call it agile or whether you want to call it learning, there is an approach where you say we're not actually that mature as a buying community just yet, or a commissioning community. We don't really know what the art of the possible is here. So let's not do the big waterfall thing, or let's not go and spend an awful lot of time buying an expensive solution, be that a product or a big lake or something, big technology solution. And actually, let's just learn a little bit. And as we become more informed, we'll know more about what we want, and probably we can start taking bigger steps in terms of our ambition. And
Yes.
So, it is a start small overlay to what tend to be big super tanker projects.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I think there may be a tendency to when people talk about data analytics and automation and AI, there's a sort of, people want to jump immediately to Skynet and great, yeah, we've got the killer robots, and can we do that in 3 weeks? How do we do that? And in some ways, impatience may be the biggest problem, that actually you need to be realistic about what you can do.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's funny how we keep not learning the lesson of big IT, and we all know that those implementations rarely succeed, or at least give all the benefits they want. And actually, we all know why, because it isn't just about a bit of IT. It's about process. It's about the people. It's about the organisation. It's about bringing the whole things together. And I don't think project analytics, funny enough, is going to be any different to that. Actually, there's no point buying a really shiny analytics platform if your data input's rubbish. If your data input's rubbish, well, why is that? It's probably not that your system's corrupting it. It's probably that your project managers either don't know how or don't know the importance of entering it in correctly, which comes back to process and compliance and culture. And so, yes, you do have to start small, because you have to bring all of those things together. And fixing any one in isolation, you can buy the best machine learning tool in the world, but if your data's not there or consistent or whatever, you're going to find that you're going to have to adjust some things before you can start doing the sexy stuff.
Yes, I mean, one thing that occurred to me when you were talking there was the question of the kind of chicken and egg question when you're starting. I appreciate this may not be a binary answer, but do you start with the data that you've got, or do you start with what you're trying to achieve, the decisions that you need to make?
Annoyingly, both. So I do think, one of the thing we'd always say is what you need to bring together is people who really understand the business context and who really understand the data. And unfortunately, my view of the project community is we haven't always valued the people who understand the data at a system level. What's in what table of what bit of the system. They've kind of always been tucked away at the back a bit, because the big stuff is bleeding from the front and welding steel or pouring concrete or whatever it is. And actually, it's bringing those people together who can know what in theory can be done in the data, with people who really understand the business domain and what the problems are, and then having a really good dialogue. Because again, starting small, there is no point picking a problem where there isn't the data to solve it.
Yes.
And as much as we'd love it to be recorded, it's not right now. So let's not worry about that. So there's an art of, well, I think you've got these bits of data that you record quite well. These are the sorts of problems you could solve with them. And the business going, yeah, okay, let's start with that one, which is sort of 80-20 in the right area. And from there, things start to develop out.
I'm guessing that if you start in that approach, then this may actually not just inform your decisions and give you more data for decisions, but actually may improve your decision making, because you have the potential, if you seize it, of then saying, well, we have these decisions over here where we have good data, and we're able to make data-based, evidence-based decisions. And then we have decisions over here where we don't have good data, and we may be able to gather the data over time, or we may actually be faced with having to make decisions, recognizing that these decisions need to be made with a paucity of data.
Yeah, definitely true. And it's interesting. So the systems we get the data from tend to be transactional systems, and so they are very good at, recording the last forecast or the last set of milestones or invoicing or whatever. Very often, when you get in there, they're frustrating from an analytical point of view. So simple, I suppose you'd call it project metadata. Is this a bridge or a tunnel or a road? And if so, which type? Where is it being built from a postcode point of view? Where's the supply chain? Who's the lead supplier? Where's the hierarchy of the supply chain? Very often, this data, that's sort of obvious analytical things you might want to slice and segment data by isn't there or is in as free text, was really hard to get to. And so again, yeah, you have to pick your battles and find something you can solve without that.
Yes.
And also then use that as a springboard to start collecting stuff that you're going to need downstream. And finally, actually, the other thing you start smuggling through, and it is sort of smuggling through, is data governance and data maturity and starting to value the data more. And the world is littered with organizations that say, right, tomorrow data is an asset, we all value data, right? And well, yeah, of course we value data, just in the same way as we value many things.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean anything. But obviously, by the time someone's got a solution, even if it's a small one working, they will start to be really quite passionate that the people entering data or using it or
Yes.
interpreting it are doing so properly. And so suddenly data governance, which is a really dry topic, starts to happen in parallel to solution development, which happens in parallel to actually fixing some of the underlying things in your business about what you capture and what your suppliers capture. And obviously that's the happy part, but I think that is attainable.
You flew the flag just a few minutes ago for the unsung heroes who traditionally had to deal with data and who've been managing data. And you know, as we get more sophisticated and as we start to generate more data and also to use more data, what are the kind of roles that either already exist and what are the new roles that we may need to create?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I was at a webinar conference, and one of the keynote speakers said for them, one of their sort of future measurements is the number of data engineers on a project, because at the moment it's kind of zero, and actually, well, that's a really important resource and one we overlook today. So I think there is, I suppose there's two parts. There's one is, it is another discipline. We have no issue in capital program land of assembling teams of experts to do a particular job, be it an IT bit or in construction, and a particular type of challenge that we're facing. We get a team of experts in, and the data problem is no different. You know, it isn't as simple as just hiring a data scientist or getting in an enthusiastic amateur to have a go at Power BI or Tableau or whatever. And you know, it's a discipline that needs expertise, and actually you're going to need people who can stitch it together, stitch all your systems together and start trying to integrate things, which is no mean feat. You're going to need data engineers. You know, I grew up when engineering meant bloke with spanner and hammer, and now it's all about data. But you're going to need data engineers who can manipulate this and get the data ready to do analysis. You know, being really disingenuous, they're doing massive VLOOKUPs. You know, it's just we all kind of conceptually get what it is, but how do you do that at scale? And then you move into people who can build reports and can do data science and those things.
Yes.
The other part of this, so that's a specialist team that you're either going to get centrally or you're going to bring onto your project. I always use a manufacturing metaphor for this, but if I was to talk to, I don't know, the marketing director of a car company and said, well, can you just, sat in your office right now, just walk us through the production line.
Yes.
Even if they weren't an engineer and knew very little about cars, they would be able to give you a pretty good run through of how a car is built, and when you marry the doors and flip it over to put the engine in and then it goes to the paint shop, I don't know, all of that process, they would just kind of know because it's part of your trade. You say to the same person, so how does the data for your organization come together? And at best, they will name check, well, we use an SAP or an Oracle or whatever.
Yes.
And then it will get really fuzzy really, really quickly. And I think, in the program space, just as any program project director would know the essence of how they were going to build or construct or deliver what they were going to do, they should also know how the data associated with that floats around. If you think data is an asset, if you think it's really important to the future of your business, then you probably should be able to, get a sheet of paper out and draw the 10-box model of how your data flows around. And again, that is not always missing, and clearly there are some people who are really good at it, but generally it's not a valued thing in our industry.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Richard. And you've kind of pushed one of my buttons there, which is looking at data almost as an organic thing rather than as a mechanical thing, and the need for decision makers to have confidence in the data and understand the limits of data. I mean, I remember when I published on cost engineering back in the day when I was a publisher, one of the books we published was on the cost engineering health check, and really making sure that the people making decisions on the basis of cost engineering information understood the limits of that cost engineering. So they knew, actually, this bit I can really trust in, this bit is a bit more flaky. And so they were able to make nuanced decisions and to understand perhaps the potential level of error in their decisions.
Yeah, and I think I think there's two things for me, because I agree in what you've just said. One is one's a hard skill and one's a soft skill. So the hard skill, that term, is understanding the provenance of your data. Project data is unusual, even though there's a lot of it. It is fundamentally manually. Most of it is manually keyed in by someone, and obviously that's not true for everything. And so you do have to understand, what the integrity of that is, and particularly if you're bringing in supplier data, understanding whether all those inputs have come in on time, whether systems have failed, and a traffic light system or something just on your dashboards to go, you know what, actually everything ran really smoothly, and we should believe these numbers today. So let's not argue about the numbers. Let's talk about what they mean. Versus, whatever, some things have come in late, they're not being incorporated. We should take these a bit more carefully. The other part, which I think is always a challenge, is as a business, you've had fairly static reporting for a number of years. You get given your pack with all the charts and tables in it, and it's quite hard to ask questions about it, and you do the best you can. And suddenly someone said, well, no, we've built this data lake thing or whatever, and now we can cut it any which way and answer whatever. And suddenly you get this explosion of reports and views and everything else, where you kind of go, well, you're going to lose yourself. You won't be able to see the wood for the trees again. So, your intuition is still really important. If you've been delivering projects for 20, 30 years, your hypotheses are as valid today as they were yesterday. The only difference now is we can potentially validate them a bit more, and also we can track whether or not they're working a bit better.
Yes.
But don't, go back to, you're never going to get the computer, or certainly no time soon is the computer going to be better than you at overall governing of everything, because there's a lot of information you have that simply is never going to be in a system. And so you have an information advantage there.
Yes. One of the things that I think projects are very focused on is setting things up. So I can imagine organizations being reasonably adept at kind of starting to build a data analytics capability. Project organizations, and in fact any organizations, are less good at kind of continuous improvement. And Martin Paver talks about this exhaust plume of data from major projects. And I have visions of a comet with a great big tail in it. How, you set up some basic data analytics, you're starting to build some dashboards, you're starting to generate data. How do you keep on top of it? How do you make sure that you're not just generating more and more data, that you're actually continuing to focus on the data that's relevant, to switch to other data sources if they're more relevant, to kind of improve your data flow rather than just...
Yeah, I think continuous improvement has never been an easy one to crack. And I suppose I'm as guilty as many others are when we talk about a data and analytics capability. Well, of course, that in itself is a bit of a nonsense. It is just an enabler.
Yes.
Ultimately, you need your decision makers and the people using the data to be constantly challenging on, well, how could I make this decision better, faster, smarter? Are there things we could do that would transform the way we use it? And again, that comes a little bit back to those people need to be interested in the art of the possible rather than just sort of passive recipients of it. I think the other thing, which is almost at the other end of geekiness, which is it's very easy to buy a tool or something that locks you into a single way of working. And the reality is, over a big project, you're obviously through the different stages of that, things are going to change. You're quite likely to have suppliers come and go, and maybe even core platforms come and go. And so you need an approach that is flexible enough to deal with those inevitable changes, both from a technology point of view, but also then, well, we've just moved from system A to system B. So let's re-examine the reports we can get from system B and the data that it's spewing out and all that kind of good stuff to challenge the way we're running things at the top of the shop. But the governing thought is it's enabling someone. It's not a thing in its own right.
Final sort of slightly off the wall question, really, just to close. I mean, as we get more data, we get better at making decisions using data, we start to use AI to sort of shape our data or drive data and our dashboards. Is there a risk that we start to kind of lose the disruptive, to lose the innovative, and actually the data that we're generating starts to take over the decisions and kind of mean that we're repeating stuff, we're not actually breaking out into new areas?
I think conceptually that's a risk. I think between today and that risk becoming a reality, there is a huge opportunity for better insights and better knowledge to be much more disruptive in their own right.
Yes.
The world. If you look at the parts of the world that are on ahead of us in their journey into embracing a more analytical approach, data tends to be a big disruptor because you realise that things that you are doing today are hugely wasteful or hugely slow. Or hugely linear when you can do them in parallel. So there is all of that maturity to go through. And yes, I suppose at the end of that, there is a risk that you start to get to kind of one best way. And perhaps all our smartphones are starting to look a bit alike now. But boy, has there been 10 years worth of absolutely stellar innovation to get there. And I think we're at the foothills of that stellar innovation long before we're going to have to worry about all being a bit samey.